Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and remember, Context is Everything Media Network founder and CEO John Michael is reading a textbook, cover to cover. And we're on chapter 16, section 5 today, which is Changes in Europe after Colonization in America, from the French, the Spanish, the English, the Dutch, and the Portuguese. Okay, yesterday, let me provide a brief summary of yesterday's reading, which was chapter 16.4, which is Turbulent Centuries in Africa because of slave trade. The Atlantic slave trade. The Atlantic slave trade was a vast network that involved capturing, selling, and transporting African slaves to the Americas. The practice of slavery had existed in Africa and other parts of the world for centuries, with the word slave originating from the enslavement of Slavs in southern Russia by the Romans in ancient Rome. The Arab Empire also used slave labor, frequently capturing Africans. In the Middle East, many enslaved Africans worked on farms, irrigation projects, and other jobs, some even raising to prominence in the Muslim world. The Atlantic slave trade started in the 1500s and provided labor for Spain's American empire. European traders relied on African rulers and traders to capture slaves and take them to coastal trading posts, where they were traded for goods. The Middle Passage was a terrifying experience for enslaved Africans who were packed below decks of slave ships and suffered from disease and were heavily mistreated, aside from the fact that they were being sold. Some African leaders attempted to resist and halt the slave trade, but the trade was too powerful for them to stop. Afonso I, ruler of the Congo in West Central Africa, sought the Portuguese's help in developing the Congo as a modern Christian state, but more Portuguese came to buy slaves, which alarmed him. The Almami of Futatoro in northern Senegal also attempted to stop the trade, but was unsuccessful, and inland traders found a new route on the coasts. Historians estimated that around 2,000 enslaved Africans were sent to the Americas each year in the 1500s, and number rose to 80,000 annually in the 1780s, when the trade peaked. By the mid-1800s, an estimated 11 million enslaved Africans had arrived in the Americas. The triangular trade involving Europe, Africa, and the Americas was a significant part of the network, with port cities depending on the slave trade. Okay, that's a review. Let's go to the next section here, which is the final section of chapter 16. Thank you for listening. Changes in Europe. Setting the scene. In the 1570, Joseph de Acosta visited the Americas. He wrote in amazement about the many strange forms of life he saw there. There are thousands of different kinds of birds and beasts of all the forest, which have never been known, neither in shape nor name. To Europeans like Acosta, the Americas seemed like a new world. As you have read, European explorations between 1500 and 1700 brought major changes to Asia, Africa, and the Americas. Here, we will look at the impact that these explorations had on Europe itself. A global exchange. This is the heading, a global exchange. When Columbus returned to Spain in 1493, he brought with him new plants and animals that he had found in the Americas. Later that year, Columbus returned to the Americas. With him were 1,200 settlers and a collection of European animals and plants. In this way, Columbus began a vast global exchange that would have a profound effect on the world. In addition to people, plants, and animals, it included technology and even disease. Because this global exchange began with Columbus, it will be called the Columbian Exchange. Never heard of it. New foods. Subheading under Global Exchange. From the Americas, Europeans brought home a variety of foods, including tomatoes, pumpkins, and peppers. Perhaps the most important foods in the Americas, however, were corn and the potato. Easy to grow, the potato helped feed Europe's rapidly growing population. Corn spread all across Europe and to Africa and Asia as well. At the same time, Europeans carried a wide variety of plants and animals to the Americas. Foods included wheat and grapes from Europe itself, and bananas and sugarcane from Africa and Asia. Cattle, pigs, goats, chickens, unknown before to Europeans, before the European encounter, added protein to the Native American diet. Horses and donkeys also changed the lives of the Native Americans. The horse, for example, gave the nomadic peoples of the West and North America a new, more effective way to hunt buffalo. There's a book called The Omnivore's Dilemma, which talks about how, in one reference in the book, that Native Americans, even to this day, their bodies aren't as geared to these European-introduced foods, which is why in certain tribes, to this day, obesity runs rampant, because the foods that are in the standard American diet are absolutely not compatible with the Native American digestive system. Well, as with most people, but they were completely separate from it for eons. I don't know if eons is the right word, but for a long time. And it's only been in the past 400 years, 500 years that they have been introduced to it. So, there we go. Impact on population. The transfer of food, crops, from continent to continent took time. By the 1700s, however, corn, potatoes, manioc, beans, and tomatoes were contributing to population growth around the world, while other factors helped account for population explosion that began this time. New food crops from the Americas were probably a key cause. The Columbian Exchange sparked a migration of millions of people. Each year, shiploads of European settlers sailed to America. Europeans also settled on the fringes of Africa and Asia. As you will read, or as you have read, the Atlantic slave trade forcibly brought millions of Africans to the Americas. The Native American population declined drastically. The vast movement of peoples led to the transfer of ideas and technologies. Languages also thrived. Words such as pajama from India and hammock and canoe from the Americas entered the European language. A commercial revolution. This is a new heading. A commercial revolution. The opening of direct links with Asia, Africa, and the Americas had far-reaching economic consequences for Europeans. Among these consequences were an upsurge in prices, known as the price revolution, and the rise of modern capitalism. The price revolution. In early modern age, prices began to rise in parts of Europe. The economic cycle that involves the rise of prices linked to the sharp increase in the amount of money available is today called inflation. European inflation had several causes. As population grew, the demand for goods and services rose. Because goods were scarce, sellers could raise their prices. Inflation was also fueled by an increased flow of silver and gold. By the mid-1500s, tons of these precious metals were flowing into Europe from the Americas. Rulers used much of the silver and gold to make coins. The increased money in circulation, combined with the scarcity of goods, caused prices to rise. Growth of capitalism. Expanded trade and a push for overseas empires spurred the growth of European capitalism, the investment of money to make profit. Entrepreneurs or enterprising merchants, organized, managed, and assumed the risks of doing business. They hired workers and paid for raw materials, transport, and other costs of production. As trade increased, entrepreneurs sought to expand into overseas ventures. Such ventures were risky. Capitalist investors were more willing to take the risk when demand and prices were high. Thus, the price revolution of the early modern age gave a boost to capitalism. Entrepreneurs and capitalists made up a new business class devoted to the goal of making profits. Together, they helped change the local European economy into an international trading system. New business methods. Early capitalists discovered new ways to create wealth. From the Arabs, they adapted methods of bookkeeping to show profits and losses from their ventures. During the late Middle Ages, as you have read, banks sprung up, allowing wealthy merchants to lend money at interest. The joint stock company, also developed in the late medieval times, grew in importance. It allowed people to pool large amounts of capital needed for overseas ventures, bypassing the guilds. The growing demand for goods led merchants to find ways to increase production. Traditionally, guilds controlled the manufacture of goods, but guild masters often ran small-scale businesses without the capital to produce for large markets. They also had strict rules regulating quality, price, and working conditions, kind of like unions. Enterprising capitalists devised a way to bypass the guilds. The putting out system, as it was called, was first used to produce textiles but later spread to other industries. Under the putting out system, a merchant capitalist distributed raw wool to peasant cottages. Cottagers spun the wool into thread and then wove the thread into cloth. Merchants bought the wool cloth from the peasants and sent it to the city for finishing and dyeing. Finally, the merchants sold the finished product for a profit. The putting out system separated capital and labor for the first time. From this system controlled by merchants, the next step would be the capitalist-owned factories of the Industrial Revolution in the 1700s. Mercantilism. Heading. European monarchs enjoyed the benefit of commercial revolution. In the fierce competition for trade, they adopted a new economic policy known as mercantilism, aimed at strengthening their national economies. Mercantilists supported several basic ideas. They believed that a nation's real wealth was measured in gold and silver treasures. To build its supply of gold and silver, they said, a nation must explore more goods than it imports. A nation must export more goods than it imports. To build the supply of gold and silver, they said, a nation must export more goods than it imports. Sounds right? The role of colonies. Overseas empires were central to the mercantile system. Colonies said mercantilists existed for the benefit of the parent country. They provided resources and raw materials not available in Europe. In turn, they enriched a parent country by serving its market for its manufactured goods. To achieve these goals, European powers passed strict laws regulating trade with other colonies. Colonists could not set up their own industries to manufacture goods. they were also forbidden to buy goods from a foreign country. In addition, only ships from the parent country or the colonies themselves could be used to send goods in or out of the colonies. I wonder how they enforced that. Increasing national wealth. Mercantilists urged rulers to adopt policies to increase national wealth and government revenues. To boost production, government exploited mineral and timber resources, built roads, and backed new industries. They imposed a single national currency and established standard weights and measurements. Governments also sold monopolies to large producers in certain industries as well to big overseas trading companies. Finally, governments imposed tariffs or taxes on imported goods. Tariffs were designed to protect the local industries from foreign competition by increasing the price of imported goods. Makes sense. The lives of ordinary people. The lives of ordinary people. Heading. How did these economic changes affect Europeans? In general, their impact depended on a person's social class. Merchants who invested in overseas ventures acquired wealth, but the price revolution hurt nobles. Their wealth was in land, and they had trouble raising money to pay higher costs for stylish clothing and other luxuries. Some sold off land, which in turn reduced their income. In towns and cities, the wages of hired workers did not keep up with inflation, creating poverty and discontent. Makes sense? Most Europeans were still peasants. Europe's growing involvement in the world had little immediate effect on their lives. Changes took generations, even centuries, to be felt. For example, traditional bound peasants were often reluctant to grow food brought from the Americas. Only in later 1700s did the German peasants begin to raise potatoes. Even then, many of them complained that these strange-looking tubers tasted terrible. Well, within Europe's growing cities, there were great differences in wealth and power. Successful merchants dominated city life. Guilds, too, remained powerful. And as trade grew, another group, lawyers, gained importance for their skills in writing contracts. Middle-class families enjoyed a comfortable life. Servants cooked, cleaned, and waited on them. Other city residents, such as journeymen and other laborers, were not so lucky. They often lived in crowded quarters on the edge of poverty. Regardless of social class, European families were patriarchal. As a husband and father, a man was responsible for the behavior of his wife and children. Women had almost no property or legal rights. A woman's chief role were as wife and mother. Society stressed such womanly virtues as modesty, household economy, obedience, and caring for the family. Middle-class women might help their husbands in a family business. Peasant women worked alongside their husbands in the field. Looking ahead. Thank you for listening, and if you've made it this far, please subscribe. In the 1500s and 1600s, Europe emerged as a powerful new force in the world scene. The voyages of exploration marked the beginning of what would become European domination of the globe. In the centuries ahead, competition for empire would spark wars in Europe and on other continents. European expansion would spread goods and other changes throughout the world. It would also revolutionize the European economy and transform its society. The concept of the West. itself emerged as European settlers transplanted their culture to the Americas and later to Australia and New Zealand. For centuries, most Europeans knew little or nothing about other lands. Exposure in different cultures was both unsettling and stimulating. As the horizon broadened, they had to re-examine old beliefs and customs. I hope you have a good day. Thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe. God bless.